Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. I'm really happy to invite Ignacio and Elo back onto the podcast. We last podcasted right before the shocking election result in Argentina, which was over 6 months ago now. We've been trying to get together since then, but our schedules have just been crazy. But finally, we got together, and we had lots to talk about in Argentine politics. As I said to them after the microphone stopped recording, I don't know any English language place where this conversation is happening about some pretty momentous changes, both in Argentina and in Latin America in general. So hope you enjoy the perspective. We had some audio problems. We had a cutout at one point. We had some mic issues on all sides. So the audio quality might not be what you're used to, but I think the insights are really good and hope you will put up with us. And I'm sure our producer will do the best he can to edit out some of the background noise. But hope you enjoy it. Email me at jacob@cognitive.investments if you want to talk about anything we talked about here. I am extremely interested in Argentina from an investment perspective right now. And I think if any of you are investment minded, you should be too, aside from all the interesting things that are happening politically. So that's not advice, but if you want to talk about it, you know where to find me. Cheers and see you out there. All right, it's so great to see you both. Elo, you're looking very comfortable, and I guess you're in Wisconsin. The sun is out. You're wearing pink shorts. Everything is great. Ignacio, you have the glow of fatherhood. As we've been talking before, we gathered together to speak right before the elections. And Ignacio, you did not think Milei was going to win, and boy did he win. And then fatherhood got in the way. All sorts of things got in the way. But I'm actually glad we delayed to this moment, because this week we get the big passage of the reform bills and the emergency powers to Milei. But before we sort of get into the substance of it, I wanted to ask Ignacio directly, how are you feeling with after the first, 6 months of President Milei? Is it worse than you thought, better than you thought, the same as you thought?
Okay.
How are you adjusting?
First of all, I knew you were going to comment on my previous forecast. I didn't know it was going to come up so early. But yeah, I know. It made me feel better than a lot of people was amazed by the result, like half of the country, as it usually happens, but so my current situation, I guess that most people's current situation is we are still trying to understand what is going on, right? A lot of new politics on the table, new ways, new agenda, new narrative, international policy. A lot of new things have been happening. New. So when I said new, it's unusual, not traditional way of doing politics in Argentina, not the traditional way of doing policies in Argentina. So a lot of new things happen. For many of us, citizens, analysts, policymakers. So we are still trying to be careful, like with our not only our analysis, but trying to understand. And the result is yet to come.
Yeah. Well, let me set the stage a little bit, and then I'll let you tackle the domestic part. And then I know Elo wants to tackle some of the international part, because it checks all the boxes of the story. For those who are not following Argentine politics very closely, and I've said this before, I mean, Milei is objectively crazy. Like, I'm not saying that as somebody who's against him or anything like that. This is a guy who his dead dog told him to run for president and gave him the strategy to run for president.
I'm turning on my microphone only for people to can listen my laugh. It's like
good. That's exactly what we want, and hopefully the people behind you too can laugh too. He recently called the governor of Buenos Aires a communist dwarf. I'm thinking about naming this podcast Javier Milei and the three communist dwarves. We'll see if I have the gumption to do it. He's called Congress a nest of rats. There's the Rolling Stones cover band. There's the tantric sex stuff. I mean, he's just a really, really wild dude. But he's not governing like a crazy person at all. So, I mean, this was a major legislative victory this week. He's gotten two incredibly important bills through both the lower and now upper house of Argentina's parliament. So the Senate narrowly approved two different sort of packages. One delegates emergency powers for a year, privatizes two state-owned firms, creating incentives for foreign investors. The other is trying to raise tax revenue by reinstating the income tax. He had to make compromises there, but he got something through the system in general. And they're sort of both good and bad to it. Since he's become president, the economy is in recession. Most projections are saying maybe 3 to 4% contraction in the Argentine economy in 2024. But his popularity is over 50%. Inflation has declined for 5 consecutive months. So, I mean, it's still year on year at 276.4%, but you have to start somewhere when you're in hyperinflation land. You've had a fiscal surplus in Argentina for multiple months in a row. This is not normal. Milei has been running around, rubbing shoulders with Silicon Valley giants, like hanging out with I don't know if it was Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. He's hanging out with all these guys and trying to get their deep pockets to come invest in Argentina, and seems to be having some success. And meanwhile, outside the Senate, people are throwing Molotov cocktails and lighting cars on fire and everything else. But the majority sort of is with Milei there in general. So help me understand this, Ignacio, because my sort of foreigner's perspective is that things got so bad in Argentina that people are willing to suffer the pain of the wrenching changes that he's bringing to politics, as you talked about, because what happened before was terrible too. And maybe he's going to sort of have a honeymoon period of a year or two where he can try to do stuff differently. But help us understand what's actually going on domestically, and whether you think that this is sustainable, or if it's just sort of he's having his 15 minutes of fame and we'll get to the end of the year and we'll talk about, wasn't that an interesting sort of chapter in Argentine politics before everything goes away?
Well, it's good to hear your, as you said, foreigner point of view, right? Foreigner vision, and what you are mentioning perfectly fits in the kind of uncommon things umbrella I was talking about, and we talked about our previous podcast was right before the elections, right? And we talked about many things he said he was going to do, and one part is that he's been doing them, That's unusual. That's not only unusual in Argentina, but it's only unusual around the world, right? I mean, he's.
So you mean he's delivering?
He's delivering. He's delivering. You can judge the results. You can be against or promote them, right? Defend the policies. But he's been doing whatever he promised and whatever he's been promising. That's one unusual thing in politics in general, even more in Argentina. And the second one is that he won the elections by saying, the first year is going to be hell. I'm telling you, the first year is going to be hell. You are all going to suffer. There's going to be blood. There's going to be crying. Things are going to get worse, and then they will be better, right? And that is exactly what has been happening, right? So the narrative in media in February, March, April was, okay, so how long is people going to keep on supporting him, to resist this, willing to sacrifice income or well-being just for a long-term goal, right? And that's also unusual here in Argentina and here and all around the world. The current president won by saying you will suffer a lot, especially the first months, and that's currently what has been happening. But okay, what you mentioned, Jacob, some indicators are amazingly getting better, right? So inflation is coming down after being like in records for 20 years, right? Fiscal surplus after years and years and years of deficit, right? Okay. Salaries are getting lower. As you said, economy is in recession, but people so far has been still defending and supporting and tolerating all these things that has been happening. And let me say one small piece of data, right? 55% of people under poverty, right? That's crazy. I mean, it's not because of him and this government. It started many years before, but the first indicators are saying that in these first 6 months, okay, the poverty increased, the poverty rate increased. So we are all worse than what we were 6 months ago, but people is partially blaming on him, but not most on him, and then looking hopefully or with a lot of hope for new results, which lead me to our third podcast.
So I have a question for you based on what you were saying about the poverty rate and everything, Nacho, because I'm a little bit surprised about some part, because this is too complex what is happening. I agree with you that this is like it's not like business as usual, and that is why he's maybe delivering, because all of the other actors and like expecting what's going to happen. So, but there was a huge cut in government jobs. So people who were working within the government, huge. And I think that he was calling it the aches, right? He was, or the chainsaw massacre, right? Literally, I'm not joking, right? This was the chainsaw massacre. And so, and Argentina is known all across the region because you had a lot of people working in the government. So, how can you manage politically this huge cut of government jobs and still like do not collapse with all these people out of their jobs?
So there are many. I think there are uh, many variables there, right? I mean, so just to give some info to the public in general. So the previous government ended with 18 ministries, right? So now they have been cut to even more than half of them. So first thing that happened was a lot of people saying, okay, it's not going to be a cut because we have already lived that, and Macri's government also had that agenda on efficiency in the public in public offices and in public policies and in public administration, but it didn't end up as a big cut, right? As a big loss of jobs and stuff. But so far with Milei, it actually meant a cut of jobs, a reduction of national government, right? So a lot of ministries, former ministries, are already had been taken over by other ministries. For example, health, education, development, which used to be different ministries are now under the human capital ministry. But the main topics are still there. So the former ministries are now secretariats, and so, but the team is still there, and the ministry is huge, massive. That's one thing that had happened, or two things. So a big reduction, but not in terms of ministries that disappeared, but mostly in terms of jobs dismantling. That's one thing. The other thing is that so the problem of delivery is still there. How is the government going to do to work to be able to push the agenda that the government the Milei wants and the population is expecting? So far it is still something that we don't know if it is going to happen. So very recently, he said, remember Jacob, previous podcast as well, previous episodes, you mentioned that he calls himself a narco-capitalist, right? And recently he said that he's dismantling the the evil from inside, right? His goal is to close the central bank, is to have the smallest government as possible. And that's a process, right? So he has an agenda, he has a goal, he's been moving towards that goal, and his goal is to almost eliminate it. I don't know how far it can go, but he calls himself an anarchist, right? He doesn't like government, and not any kind of government. So if he keeps on this pace, he will get close to reducing government. But one last point, we also talked about being able to promote the changes that he wanted to promote, the reforms. And that's a big deal and something that has been changing a lot. So what Jacob was saying this week, a big law was passed partially, but it was a law that was tried to be passed and approved in January. So this week he had a victory, but in the last 5 months he was dealing with governance, and he was having a lot of governance issues with governors, with parties, with social movements. So, answering you, Elo, is he going to be able to promote change, to deliver in terms of policies? We still don't know. He's dealing with that, and we knew he was going to deal with that, and he has been dealing with that. And today he has his first, not today, this week he had his first big major victory. So the result is still unclear.
So I want to contrast it with I think that I agree that this is the first big win in terms of policy, but he was doing some kind of things like, as you said, he was delivering his promises. Like, okay, we have 18 ministries, now we will have half of it, right? So he was delivering somehow that. So, but I think that mostly his win is in terms of the narrative. So the narrative is really sticky, and it's sticky within Argentina and outside Argentina, right? And this is, I think, how he's managing this international versus local popularity. And as we were discussing before with Nacho in a different moment, it's like, I think that the top of this narrative was in Davos when he gave the speech in Davos. And what this speech was about, it was, some people say that it was a liberal capitalist narrative. I would say was not. It was a libertarian narrative. It was, we don't need a state. We don't need government. It is not like reducing it to making it more efficient. It is just reducing it in all the possible ways because it is not efficient and it is not going to be efficient ever. That's his position. His position is different to the more liberal center approach, which is we need like this from the new public management idea of the 90s that it still has some legacy, which is we need a more efficient government that could work like like a, like a business. No, it is not his approach. His approach is the government will never work, so we have to reduce it to the minimum possible shape. That being said, so he went to Davos to say you business people need to understand that this whole idea of, and this is, and in terms of narratives, like he's trying to connect things that not necessarily are connect, but it works in terms of narrative, which is this idea of more government is associated to this idea of socialism, which is it's connected to this idea of collectivism, which is associated to this idea of social justice, which is associated to this idea of feminist movements, which is associated to this idea of environmental protection. So you started with the government is too big, and literally in his speech, it ended up with this is why environmentalism doesn't work. So he was connecting dots that are not necessarily associated, but for people who are against specific ideas, which is against social justice, against environmental protection, against feminism, just makes sense. So he defined very clear who are the enemies and who are with him. We can say, and he is saying that it's liberalism. Again, I would not call it liberalism, but in terms of narrative, he is bringing to his side, to his extreme, those who call themselves liberals and are on the right side of the spectrum. He's like, if you call yourself liberal, come here, because what you were doing is not liberalism, right? That's the way he's reshaping the words, and it works, and that works internationally, because it is not something new what he is saying. It connects with Vox in Spain. It connects with Donald Trump and MAGA in the US. It connects. It connects with Bolsonaro. So that is the part that connects. Maybe in his style and is different. I would say that actually Milei has this capacity of explaining libertarianism in a way that sounds great, because he's an economist, and that makes him even more better speaker than Bolsonaro and Trump or others in terms of policy. So, and he's giving an alternative to everything that actually didn't work, because I would argue that even if I don't agree with 95% of Millei's ideas, it is true that in the past 10 years, at least, the left in Latin America has failed in terms of policy. So that is something that is difficult to argue about. And Milei is taking that idea to say they are the enemies, so I am giving you a solution that they are not giving us. And this is not only an Argentinian issue, it is a global issue. So I'm going to tell you everywhere, you also techie billionaires, that this is the solution. Less government for you to work. Come to Argentina. And then we can talk about also the fantastic meeting with Bukele in El Salvador. So, but what do you think?
Ignacio, but before you respond to that, I'm glad you mentioned the meeting with Bukele, Elo, because that was something I wanted to get both of y'all's opinion on. Because they're not exactly the same and they come from very different ideological backgrounds. But I wanted to ask you both whether you think the comparison to Bukele is a good one. And it's hard to do it, but let me try and set it up. So Bukele comes to power in El Salvador. El Salvador is in crisis, not necessarily an economic crisis, a crisis of crime and violence. The murder rate is sky high. The gangs are running the whole country. Everything is out of control. And Bukele comes in, popularly elected, and he has stopped the violence. In a meaningful way. There has been an absolutely incredible thing has happened in El Salvador with the violence. Now, at the same time, he's basically obliterated the Constitution. He has stacked the courts with his loyalists. He's going after opposition figures, all these other things. And he has these useful idiots like Tucker Carlson now coming down and interviewing him. And they ask him, how did you achieve this? I don't know if you saw this interview that he had with Tucker Carlson. And he was like, he like looked very like pensive. And he was like, oh, it was a miracle. It's like, wasn't a miracle. Like you like doubled the size of the military and went after the gangs in like a really violent and terrible way. But like you now have the support of the population because violence has declined and this intractable situation is gone. But now you're left with this new sort of situation. It's hard to map that onto Argentina, but the way to map it would be, okay, Argentina was not facing a crisis of crime. It was an economic crisis. And things were so bad that they elected this guy who now wants emergency powers. I sort of sit up in my chair anytime I hear emergency powers in a democracy. So now he's got emergency powers for the next year, and he's going to push through sort of this vision for how he's thinking about things, and people are coming to admire him in general. And there's also the weird Bitcoin thing where Bukele goes after Bitcoin, and I'm sure Milei and his, perfect universe, Bitcoin is what's ruling. Maybe Argentina even has tokens that they're going to give to the tech bros. I don't know. Do you think there's any, do you think the comparison is too far stretched? Do you think that actually it is sort of the right comparison? Are they different? And do you think those models, the Bukele model and the Milei model, is this what's to come in the rest of Latin America? I mean, it's not what we're seeing in Brazil right now. It's not what we're seeing. Well, Mexico is sort of a different one. I'm glad you mentioned Bukele because I wanted to get both of y'all's takes about how is he different, how is he the same, and what does this mean sort of for the region in general?
So I have a very short answer.
Go ahead.
So, which is first, I think they both have the same enemies based on what I just said. So traditional politics, and in addition to that, which is not the same, in addition to that, human rights movements civil society. So they are like the enemy, social justice as a concept, right? So they have the same enemies first. And secondly, I think that they have a similar understanding of power. And if you see their meeting, the very first question that Milei shares with Bukele was, "Hey, how is this of being reelected? How is how is it of being reelected?" Right? It's like it was a fantastic question because it was like, "Hey, I like this idea." And immediately, what Bukele answered was it is necessary because we need to. I don't know the exact phrase, but it was like it is necessary because we have to continue the reforms. We have to see the reform and make them sustainable. So again, first they have the same enemies against them within their countries and the world. And I think that crime is one of them. One of them, and the other is their understanding of power and how you can deal with the issues that you have domestically.
So I agree. I wasn't going to use the term enemies, but I agree that they have a common they share interests, positions, and narratives against left, against the public power, against traditional politicians and traditional politics. Um, well, what everything that Elohim mentioned, I agree. Um, what amazed me of what Elo said is that for me, I still they are he at least Milei is still trying to learn how to use public power because he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He's an economist. He comes from the private sector. He fights against once again the traditional ways of doing politics. So I mean, he's currently ongoing a learning process, and that's why I think he's trying to connect with Trump, uh, trying to learn on his experience with Bukele. The same with a lot. He approaches with a lot of questions on how to deal with the future, with what he's supposed to expect. The same happening in Spain with Vox. So I think I'm not certain. I'm not sure about the same kind of using power. Like I mean, at least Milei, I think he's still trying to understand. And the third thing we already talked about this is global polarization is taking new limits, new frontiers, new borders. I mean, it's moving. We recently have elections in the European Parliament, and the, the extreme right won a lot of seats, and I think that the agenda is resonating powerfully among uh, normal people, right? And that's where I can connect with what Ella said again: the security agenda, the money on the pocket in the pocket agenda. I mean, the agenda is very basic, but I mean that's their agenda, and basic in terms of okay, I won't promise all of this. I don't care about the development goals. I promise money, jobs, health and security, and that's it. Education, maybe.
Well,
But
Ignacio, I love the
let me add
point. Oh,
something
sorry.
about it,
Yeah, go ahead.
Jacob, please.
Hmm?
I agree that Millet is just learning. And what was amazing about that conversation is that Millet's attitude was like, I'm going to learn from you, who is, now has been reelected. I want to learn from you. So how did you do it? How does it work? Um, uh, and at the same time, Bukele was like recognizing that he has a very small country and Millet has a huge challenge in one of the largest countries in Latin America. So I think that this this connection of Milei recognizing that he's in a different stage, and I agree with Nacho that he's like trying to figure out where he is now, but with all the the eagerness to learn how to deal with power, and that one of the references to do that is El Salvador and Bukele, and inversely how Bukele, showing all his power from the dress that he was dressing at that point, recognizes that Milei has different challenges that El Salvador, right? And I think that dynamic of you are more senior than I, but at the same time I have a largest challenge than you had. It was for me a fantastic conversation about two guys who are at the center of power right now and public image all across Latin America.
Yeah, and that's a good segue into asking you this, Ignacio, which is, the major difference between them is that Bukele has asserted his power with guns. He has the monopoly on violence, and he has the military. And like, if you're against Bukele, like, you're going to go to prison or you're going to be disappeared or something like that. The guns have not come out in Argentina. Maybe they will, but I wanted to go. We've talked about him as an anarcho capitalist, blah 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 blah, and he wants government as small as possible. I haven't actually looked at this, so I wonder, Ignacio, does that mean he wants the army as small as possible too? Are we getting rid of the army while we get rid of the central bank, or does he get to the point where he figures out I'm going to need the monopoly on violence if I'm going to do the reforms that I have to push through because I can't have the Molotov cocktails in the streets? Like, where does he fall on that? And is there any risk of that sort of violence in Argentina, do you think?
Good point. I don't think there is a risk on that. His agenda is kind of, let's say, pro-security, right? So he wants to strengthen the public forces, the army, border control, police, the sea and rivers control. So he wants to push and to enforce that agenda and to enforce those sectors, which has been out of the agenda for many years because of our history of military governments and whatsoever on that path. And so that's also new. Having said that, narco-traffic was not an issue in Argentina until a couple of years ago, and it's getting stronger. And I think you can there is a risk there. You can bet on that agenda growing, right? Less government. Now I'm talking about cramming and security policies. You both know about this, I think. Elo knows a lot, but less government is free room for all kind of organization to feel and to come, right? And that is happening. That's existing in theory. It's empty space which was covered by the government, by the state, that is releasing, and now new actors are coming to fill on those in that empty space. So narco-traffic is growing. It has been growing even before, right? I mean, just to, it's a long-term coming agenda, right? But it's going to. I would bet that it's going to increase.
So Nacho, but he has been piloting this in Rosario, right? In Rosario,
yes.
He sent the. I don't know if the military of the police only, but he deployed a lot of armed people.
So just to defend myself on previous forecasting, right? So one of the main reasons that he won, the Patricia Bullrich, who was the third candidate in terms of power and general votes, made an alliance with him. And she was a former security minister, and now she is a current minister in defense and security, right? And so she has also been pushing that agenda. It was also on her main. Milei was pushing the economic agenda. Bullrich was pushing the security agenda. So now they both join forces, right? So what happened in Rosario used to happen before. Macri in 2015 also came with three main national goals. One of them was fighting narco-traffic because of what was happening in Rosario. So fast forward 10 years later, violence is still there and it's appearing in other cities. So general agenda is like, okay, as it never happened here, it happened in all our neighbor countries, but it's coming. Winter is coming. So what are we going to do with that? And so and Milei kind of gave Bullrich the aval to empower forces in Rosario and in many other cities. It was not his main agenda. It is his agenda, but it's because of the alliance that led him into power as well.
I don't know if I like the sound of that. There's two different directions I think we could go here, but I think before we leave the domestic situation in Argentina, I think there's one more question I wanted to ask you, Ignacio, before we even get a little bit further out, which is one of the things that is so interesting about Milei, and you've pointed this out, is that he did not promise good things. He promised suffering. When you say he's been delivering some good things, but he's been delivering suffering. But he says that once you administer the medicine, the patient is going to get better. So when we're here 2 years from now talking, do you think things are going to get better? Like, do you think that he's going to continue to deliver, or do you think that it's just going to be many years of suffering? Because I can imagine the electorate will give him a year, 2 years of leeway because of how bad things were before. But if he can't deliver on, okay, we're going to have the bad period, but then we're going to get to the good period, he's probably not going to stick around. Bukele, in my opinion, only stuck around because he got rid of the violence. That's what allowed him to then go seize some of the institutions and power and things like that. Do you think it's going to work for Milei? Like, is there any optimism there?
It might. So something that was different 6 months ago for all of us, let's say citizens, if you ask in Argentina, I mean, whether you like it or not, I think almost all of us would say he was not lying. We now believe he really is committed to doing what he wants to do. So what we said, like, okay, maybe that might happen. Now the narrative has changed to, if he can, he will do it.
So even if you don't agree, Nacho, with him, you believe him.
I do believe in his word. Yeah, I mean, the main leaders in the opposition, in other parties, have been saying he was not lying. I mean, the only thing I can concede to him is that he's committed. He's committed. He knows what he's talking about. He's committed to doing it. And so now we'll see. And so having said that, I mean, I don't know if he's going to be able to do it yet. He needs the support. So you were mentioning about the size of the country, right? Argentina is the 8th biggest country in the world. So he needs the support of the territorial leaders all around the country, 23 provinces, 23 governors, who has been pushing against him in the last 5 months, but things are reaccommodating. That is one key main actor. And the other one, and maybe it's kind of a question for you too, for both of you, is markets, right? Because markets are reacting pretty well to what he's doing. So that's also unusual. For the first time in the last 5 months, dollar almost didn't move. It moved in the last month, but whenever Milei has a victory, wins anything, markets react pretty well. General risk decreases, the dollar, the currency gains value, well, a lot of things happening. So I would say that when I'm saying that if he comes, nowadays I will look at markets, governors, and social movements, which is the other third kind of key actor here, historically and nowadays too. How long will people be willing to keep on suffering and organize civil society, which is very strong here in Argentina? So I will look at those three, kind of try to give an answer to that.
But I would like to connect that with the last decree that was enacted a few days ago, and with some changes that we know, we see that this is a pro-market change. And as you said, it was very unusual in Argentina, all those kinds of changes. It is a new chapter, and we have to recognize that Milei so far with this decree has made history because it's just changing some structures in Argentina that were not able to, that nobody was able to move before. Maybe since Menem, I think, at the time of the expert in Argentine history, but I think that since Menem, we have not seen this kind of changes. So that being said, I do think, based on the decrees, that it's very likely that the Argentine economy will boost in the future. And because of the level of the economy right now, and we know this because of international development and economics and politics, political science evidence, is like when you are so low in terms of indicators, your boost is higher at the beginning. And that's enough for a re-election, because this boost, if it lasts 2-3 years, you're done. People will be happy. We can discuss the long-term effect. We can discuss how this would increase maybe inequality in the future. That's a different discussion. But in the very short term, if these changes, structural changes, work as it worked with Fujimori in Peru, and this is why I know this, the support for him is absolutely ensured. So I would say that it's very likely that this will work, and we have to accept it.
What does that mean, sort of on a regional perspective, Elo? Are we going to get Mileis in all the different countries? Are we going to get a return to Bolsonaro, and we'll get a version of Milei in Peru? And it's interesting to bring in your own perspective here, because we've talked about how Milei is sort of this very strange mix of libertarianism and liberalism and this, that, or the other thing. But he's also fundamentally a populist. And in some sense, in the same way that he's anti-establishment in the same way that Pedro Castillo was. Like, if you keep going in either direction on the political extreme, you're going to meet each other. It's a circle. It's not sort of a spectrum. And some of the enemies that you've talked about Milei having and Bukele having, Pedro Castillo has them. Gustavo Petro has them in Colombia, but they're just the far sort of on the other side of the spectrum. They'll eventually get there, I think, if they continue doing things. But how do you think that success will affect the rest of the region and Argentina's standing?
So first, I think it's about what you started saying. It's about rhetoric. I think that Milei is bringing on the conversation a new level of rhetoric, of political rhetoric in in I would say in Latin America first, in the Americas second, and even in the world. If you think about his visit to Spain, for example, right? So, and this, when I say a new level, I'm not saying it in a positive way. It is in a negative way, that he's bringing a new way of, or new limits to incivility within politics and within these relevant public figures. So I think that, at least in Latin America, I think that he's giving an example at how it works. And this is not good for the public deliberation of public discussion that we expect. And I would say that that is one of the things that Nacho was saying, that is unusual. It's a new way of doing politics, right? Some kind of respect there was. But but it seems that not anymore. So people will try to imitate. So that is first. Secondly, I think that he, unlike Bolsonaro, I think that Milei, because of the likely economic success that he could have, and he could have it because Argentina is so bad that it is easy to boost it. So, because of that, I would say that he would encourage more right-wing populism, even more. And it connects with what I said, that it is also because the left agenda in terms of policy is not necessarily delivering. And you can see it in Chile, you can see it in Colombia, and even in Brazil, even if Lula is doing good, he's not doing in the same way that he did 20 years ago. So, in contrast, you can see right-wing populism with an extremist radical rhetoric that is working both in communications and arguably it could work in economics. So let's see. So finally, I would say that unlike other groups in the political spectrum, and this is important in terms of his visits all across the world, especially the US, his kind of work is doing a regional movement. So it is on purpose. So they are building a regional movement. The left is not doing that. So Lula and Petro and I even forgot the name of our Chilean president.
Boric, Gabriel Boric. Come on,
he's doing so bad that I forgot him. So Boric, Petro, and Lula are not connected as a regional body in the same way that the right wing is building a collective body. When you see that media is also connecting them, and that is why Carlson Tucker is coming to Argentina and going to El Salvador, and maybe Bolsonaro will be next. So I think that is another kind of impact, that he is the image of a regional movement that has been on the building in the last years, and after the pandemic, it is seen as a great solution for the failure of traditional policies.
I could talk to you guys for hours, but I know that we all have to get places. So I want to give the final word to the Argentine himself, which is Ignacio. So we've gotten through elections. He's gotten his emergency powers. He's gotten his big reform bill. What should we be watching for over the next 6 to 12 months? What are the signposts? What are the things that are next? Because right now the media is running around in circles about the negotiations in the Senate and the Congress and all the crazy things that he does. Like, what will you be watching for to see if he's able to push his agenda forward, if he starts going in a Bukele direction? I'm curious where your signposts are now that he's gotten to this point.
Okay, great. So two things comes to my mind. One of them is governance. We still have to look on governance. Once again, the law that was passed 2 days ago was presented on December the 27th, right? It used to have more than 660 articles. The one that was passed has 250 articles. So it's democracy working pretty well, right? So the cross controls institutions properly working, which is also unusual. But that can lead to a lack of power, once again, to be able to deliver. That is one thing that I don't know if the word is expect, that what we have to see. We still have to see, we have to learn about it. And it will change everything, right? If he keeps on delivering, probably markets will keep on following, right? Population as well. But yeah, okay. So what is delivering? And that's the second thing. He's still committed to closing the central bank, which sounded crazy, sounds crazy, but he's still saying that that is my north.
Do you think he will be able? Do you think he will be able to do it, Nacho?
Well, again, not yet. I'm not. I don't think. But if he keeps on delivering, he will get closer and closer. So that is his north, economic north, which is probably the only north he has, right? And in order to be able to do that, he needs and he wants to reduce inflation, keep on reducing inflation, to free the currency, and to keep on closing the deficit gap. And everybody agrees on that. Not everybody agrees in if he's going to be able to do that, but that's what he's saying he's going to do, and he will be trying to do. And actually, he's doing all of that not only because he believes in that and that kind of economy, macroeconomy, but also because he needs to deal with IMF loans, right? And indicators. And he will have to do that. And if he achieves that, probably he won't finish. He's already talking about a new loan. And he approved a new loan with other international regional banks yesterday or 2 days ago. But the agenda this week is, okay, his goal is not going to finish our current debt. He would probably ask for a new loan and keep on this path with a smaller government, with less restrictions, and that's it.
And a narco-capitalist who wants another loan from the IMF. That tells me everything I need to know right there. Guys, it's great to see you, and we'll do this again soon because I'm sure that Milei is going to give us plenty to talk about. So thanks for the time, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Nacho.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Elohim.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidents podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.